Hello and welcome to July's book review. And you may have noticed I have played around with my bookshelves to give me a bit more space so I can buy more books. And to be honest, I have been buying more books, but shh, as always, don't tell Pete. This month we're back to 4 books. They were kind of chunky though, so pros and cons, and last month was just a crazy fluke in the amount I read. If you haven't seen that video, I'll link it up here for you if you're interested. Also, 3 of the 4 books I read this month are on Kindle, so I don't have physical copies to actually show you, but I will put a picture somewhere so you know what book I'm talking about. So let's get into it. Let's start off. The first book I read was Wild by Cheryl Strayed, and this is a memoir of Cheryl's life, or a period of Cheryl's life, where she's going on the PCT trails. That's the Pacific Crest Trail. Can't remember if I got the C right, but it's a walk that takes you from the Mexican border up to, I believe, the Canadian border, but she was doing a chunk of it in California and Oregon after her mum passed away and her life was going sort of downhill. And Cheryl is very much, in my opinion, that phrase of all the gear and no idea. She was carrying this huge backpack which got the nickname Monster, but she didn't really know how to use any of it, and some of the stuff that she brought had no relevance whatsoever, but the stuff that she actually needed she didn't have. For example, well-fitting boots. But she did have a foldable saw, so good on her. California is a place that I really want to go, and me and Pete have planned a trip there many a times and then never took it. He's been, but I haven't. And the way that this book described the scenery, it just sounded really pretty and made me want to go even more, except the fact that she kept talking about a snake bite kit and rattlesnakes and nearly treading on snakes and just lots of snake things. That put me off. I won't be hiking when I go to California, but I still think it sounds like a really pretty place to go and visit. Obviously this isn't your LA's or your San Francisco's, this is more rural because it's a trek, I guess that's obvious. But yeah, it also made me kind of want to do something different, something challenging. But then I, actually walked the dog or something and realised that no, I'm not a hiker. I think I mentioned this in a Dale's video. Again, if I can remember, I'll link that up here. But I don't hike. I like a walk, but I don't like a hike. So as much as this was making part of my brain go, oh, that sounds like a good idea, why don't you buy a tent and go and do that kind of thing? The majority of my brain was going, don't be stupid, you don't like that kind of thing. You like running water and a comfortable bed and not having to lose your toenails. So on the whole, I enjoyed this book. It's one of the first sort of memoir-y kind of ones that I've read. Obviously I've read a few autobiographies recently, but this is the first sort of memoir I've read, and I did enjoy it, and I've actually now got a couple more on my Kindle that I'm going to give a go at some point. I wouldn't say it was particularly profound or anything like that. I don't think it will stay with me for all that long. I have also watched the film with Reese Witherspoon that's based on this book as well recently, so it's quite fresh in my mind despite the fact that I read it at the beginning of July. But I don't think it will stay with me for years to come. But it was an enjoyable read if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. A lone female whose life isn't in a very good place, doing something to sort of kickstart herself and to, get her thoughts in order, I guess. But yes, that was Wild by Cheryl Strayed. So next I read The Host by Stephanie Meyer, who is the author of the Twilight books. And The Host has been on my radar for an awfully long time, and I think I might have seen the film but I don't remember. If I did, it was like years ago. We're talking like 8 years ago or something like that. And obviously it didn't particularly stay with me because I can't remember. But yeah, the book has been on my radar for a long time, but I've always been a little put off because it's by Stephanie Meyer, despite the fact that as a teenager I did like Twilight. I mean, I wouldn't say I was a twihard, but I read all the books, I watched all the films, and I enjoyed them. But obviously as I've grown up, you sort of see some of the flaws in those. But The Host is a completely different concept and feels a bit like it's been written by a completely different author. So The Host is about Earth, but it's been taken over by like this alien race who use human bodies as hosts. So they're like little tentacled wormy things, I think, and they get inserted into the human's head or the back of the neck, and then they take over that body, and the human inside often just sort of vanishes. But in the host that we're following, who becomes known as Wanda or Wanderer, the human doesn't take it lightly, shall we say. And it was just a really interesting look at what makes us human and the difference it would seem from the outside looking at the human race and what we do and how we go about things. It was just a very interesting look on that, as well as just being a fun story to follow. I was, however, incredibly surprised about how chunky this book was. As I say, I read it on Kindle, so I googled it, but we're talking like 650 pages here, and I was not expecting that when I picked up The Host. But what I enjoyed most about this book was the different interactions between all the characters, the different reactions to Wanda as the alien from humans and from her own kind, and all of those sort of little intricacies I really enjoyed. I would say that it was quite slow to start. I would say around the 40% mark is when it picked up and I started to really enjoy it. Before that I was a bit concerned that it was going to just drag completely and I was going to really struggle to get through it. But it did pick up, which I'm very glad about, because I'm not very good at DNFing books. Even if I'm really not enjoying them, I feel I have to finish them, because what if the ending's brilliant and really makes up for it? Or it's just my stubbornness really, isn't it? But that's a tangent that we don't need to go down right now. I would say though, as much as I'm saying I enjoyed it and all of that kind of stuff, it feels like nothing really happens, yet lots happens, and there doesn't feel like anything can be taken away from the book. I know that makes absolutely no sense, but if you've read it, please let me know if you sort of have the same agreement, or have I just completely lost the plot here. But yeah, I would recommend this book if you're skeptical about it because of the author. I would say give it a go, because it really isn't like Twilight, and I'm glad I finally got around to reading it. And it's also not really in a genre I would normally read. I would say there's some obviously sort of sci-fi elements to it, but I enjoyed it. It was a good read, and that was The Host by Stephanie Meyer. And then we get on to the only physical book that I actually read this month, and that was Midnight Sun by Trish Cook. Now, if you've been following my videos lately, you'll know that this book I picked up on BookSwap. It's the first book that I have ever done on BookSwap, and again, I'll link that video up here if you're interested. Midnight Sun, again, not to be confused with Stephanie Meyer and the latest Twilight book, because this obviously isn't that one. This follows Katie, who has an illness where she is allergic to sunlight, so she can't go out during the day, and she has all of her experiences at night, I guess, but obviously it's a very sheltered life until she meets Charlie in a train station. I have a weird enjoyment of reading books about sick kids, ill children, teenagers, I guess, that fall in love You know, your Fault in Your Stars, everything, 5 Feet Apart, all of those things I've enjoyed, and this is along the same lines as that. As you can see, it's quite a short book, which is part of the reason why I picked it up. It is 258 pages long, and I feel actually it's probably a bit too short. As much as I enjoyed Katie and Charlie's relationship, I feel the book needed to be a little bit longer to try and develop that more, so that the emotional ending actually had more of an impact. Not that I'm a big crier at books or anything like that, but it didn't really have that tug because it's just too short to get to know them and their relationship well enough to have those feelings. Also, you can tell it's written by an American author because the main character is Katie Price. If you are from the UK, you probably wouldn't have picked that name because of the link to Katie Price / Jordan, the, I don't know what she's classed as now, model, old page 3 model woman, you know who I'm talking about. Thankfully they didn't say her full name very often, but every time they did, her face came into my head, which obviously wasn't great when we're talking about a teenager in America who's allergic to sun. And also I read this book during that heatwave that we had in July, so that felt a bit contradictory, I guess. But on the whole, it's a very sweet book. I would recommend it if you liked the books that I mentioned earlier, because it is along the same lines. It is incredibly easy to read. I read it in like 2 days, and that's with full-time work and everything else that I do, where I only get like a couple of hours, hour and a half maybe in a day to read. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyable, but probably needed expanding a bit more to actually get more emotion out of it. And that's Midnight Sun by Trish Cook. And then the last book I read was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Me and Pete have just been to Bath. The video on Sunday is our first vlog from that trip, so if you're interested in that, please click the subscribe button because that's coming out on Sunday, and there's a couple more, 2 more videos after that from Bath. So I thought that's a brilliant excuse to read Jane Austen, as I know she is from around that area. Bath itself has a Jane Austen centre. And also I heard somewhere, and I can't remember where or whether I dreamed it up, but July was a month that you're supposed to read a Jane Austen in. So I thought, let's take the plunge and actually finally read Pride and Prejudice. And either I'm getting better at reading books from that era, or this one's just much easier to read, because there were fewer times that I had to Google meanings of words, although there were a couple, and I seem to flow through it a lot easier than I did with, say, Jane Eyre, for example. I don't really feel I need to explain Pride and Prejudice. It's a very well-known story with Elizabeth Bennet and the Bennet sisters and Mr. Darcy, and it is a fairly standard, simple story of romance. I would say it was probably one of your first examples of your hate to love, but obviously set in the, I'm sorry Adam if I get this wrong, the 18th century I believe it's set in, where obviously certain things aren't a thing, like dating and showing bits of skin and actually being allowed to converse with the man without a chaperone and things like that. And it was interesting reading that kind of romance, but from a completely different time, like completely far from where we are now. At the beginning of the book I did find it a little bit confusing to work out which Miss Bennet we're talking about, because there are 5 Miss Bennets in it, but once you get past the first few chapters that does become a lot clearer, and it's a lot easier to know who and what we're talking about. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's probably one of the classics I've enjoyed most. As I say, I found it easier to read than some of the other ones that I've done recently. The story is a romance, and now I am glad that I understand what everyone's talking about. I would say, and I don't think this is a spoiler, but I think Lydia is a bit of a cow. I did not like her one little bit. So yeah, Pride and Prejudice. If you haven't tried it and you're daunted by classics or those kind of books, go into it knowing that it's just a romance novel but set in a different time, and then it doesn't seem quite as daunting. As I said, there are a few words that come up regularly that I wasn't sure of, but a quick Google search and that sorts it out, and once you do that the first time, the rest of the book, as I say, is a lot easier. So yeah, that was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And that's everything I read this month. So back to the normal 4 books, but they were chunkier and we did go away quite a lot, because also we did the Midlands road trip, which again I'll promote up here for you. So yeah, I'm interested to see what we get to in August, because I did have a vague plan going into July. I knew kind of what I wanted to read, whereas August is wide open and I don't really know what to read, and I do keep buying books, which keeps making any ideas that I come up with rejigged, because there's something else that I'm really, really excited to read. But anyway, please click that subscribe button, see what we get up to in August. If you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!